and Darius, you as host need to be the one to do that. Great. Okay, so it's happening. So I'm Lucy Malenke. I'm a faculty member in our University Writing Center, and I want to start by pointing out that applying this model to a learning center or a department as a whole is obviously a sort of complicated thing to do. Our department is made up of programs that are made up of people, and obviously not all of the 119 people employed by the learning centers are in the same stage of the trans-theoretical model when it comes to their identity as anti-racists or their work with anti-racism. Now, some of our programs have been explicitly engaged in anti-racist work for years, and others have initiated that work more recently. So what I'm going to do is start broad, and I'm going to share about what's been going on a department level. And then I'm going to hand it off to the others to describe some of the things that have been happening in our individual programs. If you want to change the slide, that'd be great. Okay, so, back one. Thank you. So before the events of last summer, I would say that our department as a whole was in a state of quasi-contemplation. Many of us were aware that racism existed in learning environments. Many of us wanted to change that, would say we were committed to changing that. But our department had yet to formalize a cohesive commitment to anti-racism. So last July, as the Black Lives Matter protests unfolded across the country, I decided to seize on that cultural moment and ask our executive director if I could assemble a team of faculty and students to draft a statement on behalf of our department that would guide us in meaningful, deliberate action. So she gave us our blessing, Laura Schubert, our executive director, and I had 4 faculty members, including Darius and Paul, who are here today, and 1 peer educator sign on to draft our statement. So this is when we entered the preparation stage. We spent about 2 weeks doing research in order to prepare for drafting our commitment. And this included looking into the particular ways that racism manifests at our institution and in learning environments like ours. So, for example, through local institutional research, we found that BIPOC students at our predominantly white institution often feel excluded, tokenized, or ignored. Black students are often assumed by white students and sometimes faculty and staff to be athletes or on need-based scholarship. Asian students in the STEM disciplines have to contend with model minority stereotypes. We also looked into how writing a meaningful, action-oriented anti-racism statement, not a performative one meant to be a substitution for action, actually happens. And finally, we reviewed anti-racism statements from other departments and learning centers, and some of the resources that we found that we think might be useful to you are referenced in our supplement. So from there, we drafted and revised our commitment to anti-racism. We solicited feedback from our department, revised again, and then adopted the commitment. And you can read that full commitment in the program supplement or on our website. But next slide, I want to zoom in on the 10 action-oriented pledges that we made. And these cover topics such as faculty and tutor training, recruitment and hiring practices, departmental values, and creating support structures for BIPOC students and faculty. I also want to emphasize that we still consider this the preparation phase. We don't actually think of articulating a commitment as an action in and of itself, but it prepares us to take meaningful action. Next slide. What happened next is that our executive director then chose to suspend all committee work for the year so that our department could focus on fulfilling these pledges. She also appointed a Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion team to lead those efforts. And that team then created a list of action steps to help us fulfill our commitment. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot of a small section of that document where we take each of our commitments and sort of translate them into action steps. This is a living and dynamic document that we are updating regularly as we make progress. And the entire action steps document can be accessed through the supplement. So with a strategic plan for enacting our commitments, we began doing just that, and we entered the action phase. So if you could advance to the next slide. A lot of the action has happened on programmatic levels, and we're going to get into that momentarily. But I do want to point out a few things that have happened or are happening on the department level. After a review of recruitment and hiring practices, several Learning Centers programs have teamed up to collaboratively recruit peer educators from organizations and locations that are likely to elicit a more diverse applicant pool, such as our Center for Multicultural Student Services and resident halls. I know several have also changed language in their job postings. As a department, we've established a group where BIPOC employees of the Learning Center, so peer educators and faculty and staff, can get together, share their experiences, and support one another. And we're currently in the process of creating an anti-racism module that our peer educators and office assistants will be required to complete as part of their onboarding process. I think it's also worth pointing out, as I think Darius mentioned this earlier, that these stages overlap. So we are still preparing as well. And one of the major initiatives this semester is to administer racial climate surveys to our student employees, our clients, our peer educator alumni, and our faculty and staff, so that we can make informed decisions moving forward and have a baseline for assessing the impact of our actions. So I'm now going to hand things over to Jenna from our Science and Math Learning Center.
Thank you, Lucy. Yep, I am Jenna Gunther. I'm one of our faculty members in the Science and Math Learning Center. And in the Science and Math Learning Center, our 5 faculty coordinators all had different levels of experience with engaging in anti-racist work coming into this year, but we were all united in that change was necessary. We felt that to enact lasting change with our tutors, we needed to have a firm foundation as coordinators. And so for a large part of the fall semester, we were in the contemplation and preparation stages, focusing on really educating ourselves. So we read books, joined campus reading groups, enrolled in courses, and attended events to expand our individual knowledge of anti-racism that we then brought back to our faculty meetings. And then in the second half of the semester, with a stronger foundation, we moved into the preparation and action stages, where we focused on reevaluating our tutor hiring process and training our tutors on anti-racism. Next slide. In hiring new tutors, we really want our potential employees to understand our commitment to anti-racism. And so we included our statement on the application page. And as part of the written application, we added a question about applicants' perception of inclusion and its impact specifically on tutoring. We also added an interview question to learn how potential tutors interact with people who have different perspectives than them. In terms of training our tutors on anti-racism, we didn't know where most of our tutors were at. And so we dedicated our monthly training workshop in November to this topic. We kept it pretty introductory with the intention of sharing our efforts as a department and getting a sense of what stages our tutors were in. In that training, we shared our department's commitment statement and action steps, had some discussions about some relevant terms like implicit bias and microaggressions, and then the tutors actually explored some resources and submitted a reflection after the workshop. For tutors who were eager to dive in deeper at this time, we also sponsored them to participate in the anti-racism training offered by the Diversity and Resiliency Institute of El Paso, which was recommended by 2 of our department colleagues. And I also participated alongside them to continue my own learning and to support the tutors in their personal growth. Next slide, please. And these are just some quotes from our tutors after that anti-racism workshop in those reflections. So seeing the expansion of perspectives, especially in that last quote, really validated that this training was a positive contribution to our program's process of change and a good place to build from as we are actively planning our future trainings. And as we figure out where our next steps lead, we continue to be in that preparation and action stages, going back and forth in that flux. But we are, as a program, are very proud of the progress that we've made thus far. And I will now hand it over to the past program with one of our peer educators, Claire.
It looks like University Writing Center has jumped
Sorry
past
about
here.
that. Sorry, going to Rudy.
No worries. So my name's Rudy Barrett. I'm another one of the faculty members at our University Writing Center. And I'm just going to share a little bit about what our process looked like from within our program. We started, as Lucy mentioned, in this sort of state of quasi-contemplation, because a lot of modern writing center scholarship deals with issues of race and multi-dialectalism in writing. So many of our faculty had experience or even published, conducted research on these topics, but we hadn't formalized a concentrated effort until this really began and became a departmental focus. When we moved out of that contemplation into action, our focus was on consultant training. So we have a professional development model in our writing center where, in addition to the hours that consultants are tutoring, they have hours for small group meetings with individual faculty or graduate students, or all staff meetings. And usually there's an educational topic or professional development topic that is shared at those. We had some modules that were based on mindfulness, non-judgment, and on working with English language learners, of which there's certainly overlap with some of the habits of mind for good anti-racist work, but we hadn't formalized anything that dealt with anti-racism. So we created modules for those professional development meetings for peer educators dealing with anti-racism and multilingualism, particularly when it comes to the practice of writing. Something that was important to us was that our predominantly white consultants would be comfortable talking about race when it comes up in student papers in history or political science courses. And these can be kind of fraught conversations that sometimes there's a hesitancy for white students to be able to engage with. And we wanted that to not be the case in our center. Similarly, there's a tutor training course. For us, it's WRTC 336, Writing Consultation. That's a prerequisite for hire in the University Writing Center. So we developed a module for that course that deals with the anti-racism training explicitly before you're even going into your first session as a consultant in training. And we also added some questions to the post-session surveys that all of our clients receive dealing with inclusivity. One was a Likert scale question of, did you feel included during the session? And these are for a specific interaction, a learning interaction in our center. And then the other one was open-ended, which linked to our Learning Center-wide statement and asked how well we felt, how well the client felt we were meeting our statements, stated goals, and if they had any other feedback for us. That way we could hopefully elicit some qualitative responses. And the goal there is, of course, to move to a maintenance stage where on a semester by semester basis, we are looking at the modules we've created, updating them and making changes based on the climate survey or the other work going on in our department. So that's just a snapshot of what the UWC did. And I think now we'll move to PASS.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Claire and I'm a student leader within the Peer Assisted Study Sessions or PASS program within the Learning Centers. And so I'm going to chat about what PASS has done with anti-racism initiatives. So we started again in the contemplation stage, and we used the Learning Center's commitment to anti-racism that was mentioned earlier to guide a PASS specific commitment to anti-racism that we had our leaders read in addition to the LC anti-racism statement prior to the beginning of their PASS employment. And then with the PASS commitment to anti-racism, we had professional development meetings. So similar to what Rudy mentioned, in the past, these professional development meetings have been focused on things that were helping leaders improve their PASS skills, such as public speaking or planning PASS sessions. But this past year, we focused these PD meetings on anti-racism specific themes. And some examples of those themes are the trans-theoretical model of change, which we are talking about in this session, stereotype threat, bias, and creating inclusive PASS sessions. in addition to these training themes, we also had leaders do independent research on anti-racist related resources that they then brought to these PD meetings to have discussions about with their peers and with the PD leaders to really dive deeper into either past specific anti-racism work or something that was related to their potential careers. And then similar to this, we had a book club with our leadership team. So like Jenna had mentioned earlier, we also wanted to educate ourselves in addition to educating our past leaders. So we did a book club, which is a little unique and different than a normal book club. We all read different resources and then brought our summaries and things we learned from those resources to our book club meetings to have a broader discussion about many different forms of anti-racism. And lastly, in the action stage, we included a section of inclusivity and racial climate questions in the past mid-semester survey. And what this mid-semester survey is it's sent to students who attend past sessions, and that feedback is given to the past leaders as well as the leadership team. So past leaders get an idea of how their actions and maybe phrasing of things in their past sessions affect the students that attend those sessions. And then lastly, to prevent relapse and stay in this maintenance phase, we added anti-racism initiatives into its own section during our weekly leadership team meetings. And if we go to the next slide, this is a example of a leadership team meeting minutes document that we come back to weekly, and the large purple arrow points out the anti-racism items that we have included in this document. And this really reminds us to continue to have these conversations weekly, come up with new ideas about how we can initiate anti-racism into PASS as a whole. And so this has been really helpful for our continued effort in this area. And on the next slide, this is a slide sort of like Jenna showed of past leader quotes that we pulled from a survey we gave them after the PD meetings to see the impact of our current initiatives. And you can see the first few bullets focus on the students enjoyed preparing for the meeting through their resources that they read. And this shows Darius mentioned the wake-up call that is usually needed to go from pre-contemplation to contemplation. And I think having past leaders dive into resources and then talk about them really helped jumpstart their involvement into this process of change. And then the last few bullet points focus on past leaders discussing more active steps they would like to take in past sessions to combat racism, as well as discussions about privilege and how their perspective has been changed on racism. And this shows that leaders might now be moving into the preparation phase. And we're hopeful that continued initiatives such as these and others that we're planning will help leaders progress even more into action and maintenance. And now I'll pass it back over to Paul to talk about his work.
Hello, everyone. This is Paul again, and I am a faculty member in the Communications Center, where we oversee the work on public speaking, presentations, and other communication-related pedagogies. I'm just going to try to be brief and highlight some of the things and stages that maybe haven't already been mentioned. Like many areas, we have already done some of this work on an ad hoc basis. We've talked about inclusive tutoring. We've talked about how we can try to work with student users who are maybe discussing, either personal, potentially violent or structurally violent concerns in their speeches or presentations. And so we've done internal trainings on that. But really, we're looking to institutionalize. That's one of the big things that we discovered in the process that Lucy had mentioned, is trying to link up these ad hoc efforts and really trying to put them into the structures that we have in order to make this trans theoretical model of change more meaningful. One of the big pieces that we engaged in on this ad hoc basis was, and I'll put this in the chat, there's an article in the recent Communication Center Journal that is called, "Is the Communication Center Racist?" That takes up the issue of Black linguistic justice. And so we use that as a reading piece for us, and are looking to do actually some more programming. Part of the conversation was around students who said, hey, one of the things that we need to do is work with faculty across the entire campus who do presentations and communication related work in their classes and engage in some awareness training, and for ourselves to learn and to get feedback from other faculty and students on campus. So that's something that's going to be forthcoming in terms of programming. Another piece that we did is a data audit, sort of looking at our current representation of the staff at the communication center and also our clients, and to see, are there particular student demographics or student populations who are under or overrepresented, comparing that to the JMU student population. And so that was one thing that we've looked at as part of the action phase. And then again, like others, are integrating this into our recruitment, our hiring, and trying to develop resources and use our resources that we have, our professional development funds, our book funds, in order to leverage those within the Learning Center, and across campus. And next slide, please. And we'll turn this back over to the recommendations for overall learning centers.
Yeah, and I'll sort of be brief with this because I certainly want to leave time for us to have discussion, to answer questions, and to also hear from all of our participants on ideas that they either have or have engaged in. We presented a lot of information, and I'm basically going to take this slide to distill some of that information to some sort of core takeaways. One thing that was really important for us as a learning centers was to first establish a collaborative team of like-minded and motivated individuals to sort of lead the efforts and initiatives at a departmental level. This is really important because any sort of anti-racism work done within a department is way too much for any one individual to carry on their own shoulders. Additionally, it's important for a team to be cohesive. If the team is made up of individuals who have whose time is sort of split, or they have competing interests, or even it's the reality that not everyone in the department will be on the same page in terms of racism. Some may hold or have adopted racist beliefs that might not be productive for a collaborative team. So it's important to establish a team of like-minded individuals. As Lucy pointed out earlier, it's also important to create an actionable and goal-oriented plan. This could, particularly at a departmental level, the departments are made up and programs are made up of individual people that may vary across that trans-theoretical model of change. And a departmental wide guide of a plan that can guide a department can really be a tool to sort of guide individuals and programs, and to keep everyone sort of, to remind everyone, like, what are we moving towards? What's our broader goal? And that can prevent sort of a relapse back into the pre-contemplation stage, or even the contemplation stage as well. It's also, as mentioned across our programs, it's important for us to identify and find ways to integrate that anti-racist change into the fabric and core functioning of our programs and entire departments. And for us, this showed up as sort of paying for training, or integrating anti-racism into training, integrating into meetings, including it as part of the interview process as well. Less spoken about, but also very important. I believe Lucy mentioned that our executive director, Laura Schubert, was able to suspend all other committee work, which freed up the time, space, and energy for all of us during a pandemic where we're still adjusting to what's going on in the world. It allowed us the extra time to actually commit to anti-racism. And what's important from that sort of example is that we are fortunate that we have a leader of our department who was willing to use her power to support anti-racism efforts. Moreover, her boss was Dr. Rudy Molina, forgetting his exact title, but he also, just the department meetings has been shared that he's also been supportive of anti-racist efforts. And what happens is, like, for universities or departments that have leaders who are either antagonistic or less interested in anti-racist change, they can be sort of an inhibitory factor for anti-racist change. And so one thing that we need to do consider is how can we speak the language of those who hold power within our department and universities, whether that's through leveraging research, appealing to emotion, or whatever the case may be. That's something that we, as individuals and program leaders, need to attend to. And lastly, as Lucy pointed out, one thing that we did as a Learning Center was create a space that we named Peacock. And this space really just serves to provide emotional and social support for peer educators and faculty members of color within our department. It's important to consider, for me, I like to share this as a mental health professional by trade, that the things that are going on in the world, the vicarious exposure to these events, they do hold a lot of weight mentally and psychologically. And the burden of anti-racist work within a department can also sort of come with a cognitive load. And it's important to consider these sort of spaces as essential and important for our peer educators and faculty of color. And so those are some of our recommendations. And now I want to sort of turn it over to our participants and all of our other presenters to sort of engage in discussion, to ask questions and provide answers, and also to share other efforts amongst everyone.
Great, thank you, Darius. I showed that we have about 14 or so minutes left. And there were 3 questions that I picked up from the theme, or from the chat box. And I'm wondering if anybody from either the JMU or others want to tackle these questions. And Lucy, I know you did some responding in the text box, but one question is, how do you reach different people who are coming at different levels and have different experiences or backgrounds or experience with institutional racism? Let's start there as the first question.
I can jump in a little bit. I think the question had to do with basically the problem of gearing all of the efforts toward education of white tutors, or maybe even white tutors, or faculty who may know more than we assume they know, and failing to consider those in other subject positions, from the position of being a peer educator of color, faculty member of color in the centers, or someone who's more advanced in their anti-racist work. And I think this is definitely something that's been on our radar, and I don't necessarily have a solution to it, except to say that it has been a part of our conversations and our thinking. Yeah, I don't know the answer, and maybe others in the department have more to add. I do think that creating spaces that allow discussion that is growth oriented, allow people to come in from different places. And I did mention Rhonda McGee's book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, which I think does a really excellent job of providing some mindfulness exercises that allow people, wherever they are on their anti-racist journey, to do some meaningful reflection. And so I don't know, I don't feel like I've done a great job of answering that question, but those are the thoughts that came to me.
I mean, I would love to get any resources or other things from folks, because the other thing that's been challenging too is I have a significantly large population of international students as well, who are tutors, who, they bring their own unique perspectives to this issue of anti-racism. And, some of them understand the historical context of racism in America, but it's been, I just wanted in designing the training for my students, trying to engage all of these different experiences has been challenging, and wanting to make sure that I do justice to bringing the American issues to the table while also recognizing their unique experiences has been challenging. So I appreciate any resources folks have to help make it engaging and meaningful.
I think one thing for us that has been helpful is setting up some norms for the discussion, or some best practices for the climate of the discussion. And in doing that, acknowledge that people will be coming with different experiences, and that these are moments of vulnerability. And then, I mean, the great thing about this particular student population is peer educators tend to want to learn from one another. And so there's that element as well. And so they'll acknowledge, or I will acknowledge, like, you all know more about, you have more experience with this, I'm learning from you, vice versa, et cetera. And so I think sort of doing here are some expectations for how these conversations we would like them to happen, whether it be, if you want to use brave space instead of safe space, or, there are lots of resources online, and happy to point you to them later if you want, in terms of that. And then 2 is reminding them that we are learning, and it's okay, we're going to make mistakes in how we're talking about these things and how we're sharing. And I think that will help address some of those. So it's okay for one student, to share that and be vulnerable.
One thing that I've found there also that's useful about capturing maybe make sure that folks are engaged who might be farther along on their own personal development when it comes to awareness of anti-racism or social justice is resources that are directly connected to the praxis in your program. Because I had a conversation just yesterday actually with my small group in professional development, and a sentiment came up that many of them independently viewed social justice as a value of theirs, and that they were researching on it, and they thought that they were like passionate about it. It was something that was really important to them, but they hadn't brought it into the writing center. They felt like these two worlds were separate, and before they had read some of the more praxis focused writing center readings that we provided, they didn't see the connection or how they could sort of dovetail. So that could be another way, is like, I think some introductory like terminology is probably necessary, because you raise a really excellent point that for many privileged peer educators, we might be introducing these terms or foregrounding these terms for the first time, but having something that connects them to their work immediately might also let folks who are farther along in that journey still like apply something new.
Thank you, Rudy and Lucy. Or Lucy, we're going to add some more.
I was just going to dive into the question that was asked about the what's going to be in the anti-racism module that is required, but I can also not go to that question if there's one ahead of it.
There are 4 questions total, but why don't you jump into that one, the module?
Okay, I was just going to really quickly, so this is very much still in process. It's something that we're working on, but what we are thinking about right now, and this would be part of our onboarding process. So all of our student employees, whether they're peer educators or office assistants, have to do a Title IX training before they can start work for us. This is going to be something similar. And this is not meant to be a comprehensive anti-racist education. This is meant to be a sort of our objectives are just to make sure that we are committed to anti-racism as a department, that it aligns with our mission and values, to make sure they have a basic understanding of key terms and concepts, and to familiarize students with the forms that racism is likely to take in our learning centers. So right now we have a plan to give them a glossary of terms that then come up in it's going to be a sort of video-based screencast that sort of walks them through the types of the manifestations that racism can take in learning centers. So things like ways that racial stereotype can crop up in sessions, issues like linguistic imperialism or pressure to perform whiteness, or body language that demonstrates discomfort. And then we're also going to plan provide some action items for ways to sort of move forward and begin sort of addressing these issues. And we're also thinking about having a separate video that incorporates some real stories or experiences that people who have worked within the learning centers might volunteer to have shared anonymously. And so that's what we're thinking about right now. Again, it's still very much in progress.
And one thing to add to that is it is an onboarding module that is currently done through Canvas, that it includes the Title IX stuff, but it's also just like, here's what the learning centers are a part of. Here are the people here are resources within the learning centers. And so it's really a pretty robust part that this will be a piece of. Thank you for answering that question, Lucy. Two more questions that we've had so far. One, just talk about briefly, and that is examples from our climate survey. Don't want to talk about it too much because we only have about 4 minutes, but Lucy did drop links to both our current draft of the climate instrument and then also the resources from which we adapted and edited those. And so the current version is geared towards peer educators. We're also developing climate survey for alumni, for faculty and faculty and staff. And so that's there. The bigger question that I think it would be good for us to talk about in the few remaining minutes is this idea of resistance that someone mentioned in the chat. You know, have we encountered, you know, among faculty, staff, peer educators, any kind of resistance, and how do we work with that? I think that's also something that Paige said that they're going to be tackling in the next section. Following this one, there's another anti-racism training session as part of the conference. But I don't know if any of our peer educators or faculty from JMU want to touch this, or others in the audience.
I'd be happy to just give a very brief answer. In terms of resistance, I've had a background of working in addiction counseling. Resistance is always something that comes up. People don't want to usually give up their substances. And that's been the skill that I've been able to draw on. And for me, and within the past program at JMU's Learning Center, I've decided to just, one, maintain compassion and humility as a sort of stance to aspire towards, so that I don't push students away when the anti-racism training can be sort of a learning and growth opportunity. At the same time, I make sure that I am communicating the department-wide and program-wide commitment to anti-racism. So while I'm being compassionate, I'm listening and supporting my students, I may also challenge my students in sort of small scaffolded ways. Maybe I won't give them this entire dissertation worth of knowledge or task to complete, but I might just give them a small challenge in that sort of way. But yeah.
And in that way, I suppose the fact that it's a part of a training for a job that's situated in a culture that you've established in your center, and you're allowing people to be where they're at on the cycle, you know, it sort of acknowledges what may be uncomfortable and the importance of being in that discomfort, and then everybody can take a small step forward from wherever they are to where we're all heading.
That's a great point. And we have not encountered any resistance that I'm aware of in the communications center. And it could be that if there is resistance, that they don't want to show it right now as a result of the institutional commitment to it. You know, and that's also larger societal concerns, you know, in terms of how racism is manifesting now. But we're very lucky to have Darius as a member of our learning centers to bring that wealth of knowledge and experience on you know, addiction and on the change management and helping us develop these modules and this commitment. And so for, yeah, those of you who can't see in the chat, Lucy said that she'll be updating the resources, the supplemental stuff on her page on the, and she dropped the link there. You can also reach her via email at malenklb@jmu.edu. But that we'll put the link to this video from this session, the materials that were referenced in the chat, in addition to everything else. But really want to thank you all for joining us this morning. And really look forward to the rest of the sessions today, to Paige's session next. And just thank you to my friends and colleagues here at JMU.